Have you ever felt like you're running on a treadmill that keeps getting faster, but you're not moving forward? You work harder, you earn more, yet your bank account feels lighter every year. Most people blame inflation, corporate greed, or simply bad luck. But the truth is far more sinister and calculated. It traces back to a single, quiet decision made on a Sunday night in the summer of 1971. This wasn't just a minor economic shift. It was the birth of the greatest financial illusion in human history. The anchor of money was cut, physical reality was suspended, and you were locked into an endless cycle of debt. Today, we go back to the moment the foundation of modern financial slavery was laid. If you want to understand why the system is mathematically designed to keep you losing, you must understand the year 1971. To appreciate the gravity of this shift, we must look at the world that existed before it. Under the Bretton Woods system, established in 1944, money had a physical soul: gold. The US dollar was legally fixed to gold at a rate of precisely $35 per ounce. At that time, global currencies were not floating in a void. They were pegged to the dollar, which in turn was anchored to the earth. This structure imposed a word that modern governments and central banks absolutely hate: discipline. It meant that money represented something tangible, scarce, finite, and incredibly costly to extract from the ground. A government could not simply dream up new money to fund its global ambitions. Every new dollar required a physical ounce of gold to back it up in a secure vault. This was a shield, a financial fortress that protected the common man's savings from the monster of endless money printing. For the average citizen, a dollar saved was a piece of gold earned. But for those who wanted total control over the world's resources, this discipline was a prison that had to be broken. By the late 1960s, this prison was under severe strain. The United States was attempting the impossible, financing the incredibly bloody and expensive Vietnam War while simultaneously expanding massive domestic social programs known as the Great Society. The printing presses in Washington began to hum at a feverish pace. The supply of paper dollars began to explode, but the gold reserves at Fort Knox did not grow. Dollars poured into global markets, far exceeding the physical gold held in U.S. vaults. This was the moment the world began to smell a rat. Foreign governments began to notice the massive imbalance. They realized that the Americans were essentially exporting their inflation to the rest of the world, paying for their wars with paper that had no underlying reality. Countries like France, under the leadership of Charles de Gaulle, were the first to openly question whether the dollar was still as good as gold. In a famous act of defiance, de Gaulle began converting France's dollar reserves into physical gold, literally sending ships across the Atlantic to bring the metal back home. This wasn't speculation. It was a rational and desperate escape from a sinking ship. The world was witnessing a classic run on the bank, but on a global scale. The problem was simple, mathematical, and dangerous. There were far more paper dollars in circulation than there was gold to back them. The illusion was about to be shattered. On the night of August 15, 1971, President Richard Nixon addressed the nation in a televised speech.
I have directed the Secretary of the Treasury to take the action necessary to defend the dollar against the speculators. I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets, except in amounts and conditions determined to be in the interest of monetary stability and in the best interest of the United States.
That changed the course of human history forever. He was calm. His voice was fatherly and reassuring. But his words were a global financial bombshell. He announced that the United States would temporarily suspend the dollar's convertibility into gold. He told the public he was defending the dollar against international speculators. But history has shown that the word temporary was the most expensive lie ever told to the human race. That gold window never reopened. Think about the magnitude of that moment. In that single evening, money lost its anchor to the physical world. The world transitioned into a fiat system, a Latin word meaning "let it be done." Currencies now derived their value not from physical reality or scarce minerals, but from government decree, institutional credit, and the public's fading trust. Once gold was removed as a limit, the rules of the human experience changed fundamentally. We moved from a world of earning to a world of borrowing. Governments and central banks suddenly gained a godlike power, the ability to expand the money supply without any physical constraint. Deficits stopped being a problem to be solved with taxes or productivity. They became a tool to be financed through endless borrowing. Inflation was no longer a sign of economic failure. It became a deliberate, hidden policy to slowly erode the value of the debt the government was creating, and your life savings along with it. This is why prices never go back down. Debt stopped being a cyclical part of the economy. It became the very structure of the economy itself. Since 1971, the system did not collapse in the way people expected. Instead, it expanded into a giant, global bubble of credit. But this growth was a mirage. It delayed the system's necessary correction by stacking debt upon debt. Each major financial rescue, from the 1980s to the massive 2008 collapse, raises the baseline of total debt. Each stabilization by the Federal Reserve increases the fragility of the entire tower. This is the reason why every crisis today appears larger, more terrifying, and more difficult to solve than the one before. We are no longer fixing the system. We are just buying time with money that doesn't exist. At some point, we must stop and ask the questions that the mainstream media ignores. Is a system truly stable if it requires constant trillion-dollar interventions just to stay on life support? Is economic growth real if it depends entirely on the expansion of debt and the destruction of the currency? Is money a store of value if its worth depends entirely on the collective belief of a population that is becoming increasingly disillusioned? Belief, unlike gold, is emotional. And emotions are not linear. They can change in a heartbeat. History does not always repeat, but as Mark Twain said, it often rhymes. Empires fall, currencies fail, and systems that lose their touch with reality eventually reset to their intrinsic value, zero. Through centuries of collapse, only a few principles survive, and none of them involve paper promises. If this deep dive into 1971 helped you see the cracks in the financial system, don't let this be the last truth you uncover. Most people will continue to run on the treadmill, but you now have the context to step off. Hit the like button if you believe it's time to return to a world of real value, and subscribe to our channel to join a community that looks beyond the headlines. We are just beginning to peel back the layers of the global machine. In our next chapter, we will examine what actually endures when the systems of men do not. Are you ready for the reset? Because ready or not, the math doesn't lie. Click the bell icon so you don't miss our next investigation. The truth is your only real asset.